bells were used as communication devices. There were no radios, televisions, or telephones back then, and the city was growing, so they needed a much larger bell. And the second reason was that Pennsylvania was celebrating the 50th anniversary of William Penn's Charter of Privileges, which guaranteed religious liberty here to the people. And that was really rather special and unique at the time. So this inscription went around the top: proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, which is from the Bible. So they ordered the bell way back in 1751 from Whitechapel's foundry in London. When it arrived over here, it cracked on its first test ring. That crack is nowhere to be seen today. It's not that one, because rather than send the bell all the way back to London, the Assembly decided to hire John Pass and John Stowe, two local brass founders, to recast the bell. Now that meant they had to first of all make a mold of that bell. Then they broke the bell up into little bits and pieces, melted it down entirely, and recast it. So that's what you see here today, made in Philadelphia in 1753. It's then hung in the State House steeple, there, and it was simply called the State House bell. And it just performed its duty as a communication device, bringing to call the assemblymen together for meetings, to announce special events, celebrations, maybe births and deaths of prominent citizens, things like that. So the next time then that you can really associate something significant with this bell would be during the Revolutionary period. And the bell did not ring on July the 4th, it rang on July the 8th. And that was when this bell, as well as all the other bells in the city, rang all day long, calling all the people together to meet in the backyard there at the State House to hear Colonel John Nixon read out loud to the public for the very first time Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, which truly proclaimed liberty throughout the land. And so now, for a second time, we can associate a liberty with this bell and not a political liberty. But after the war and after the state capital moved on to Harrisburg, this was still just another city bell, still only locally known. It wasn't until much later that it started to gain national recognition. And this was around 1839 when the bell was used as a symbol against slavery by a group of abolitionists or anti-slavery people up in Boston. They knew about this bell, they knew about this inscription, and really felt that inscription was a good motto for their cause: liberty throughout for all the inhabitants. So they started to put pictures of the bell on their pamphlets and literature, pulled out that keyword liberty, put it in big gold letters across the front of the bell, and started telling you about the Liberty Bell. That's how it got its name. And then they popularized it with songs and poems, and because they were a national organization, it became nationally known. And it stood at this time for its third and final liberty, that of civil liberty or human liberty against slavery. But sometime prior to this, we don't know exactly when, perhaps the 1830s, the bell started to crack. It was a gradual process where it just simply wore out, so there's really no one single date or single event that can contribute to this crack. However, by 1846, it was such that it was really distorting the tone of the bell. Two rough edges of metal would hit against one another and cause vibrations and reverberations, and just generally distort the tone. So then in 1846, in order to ring it for George Washington's birthday, a holiday, it had to be repaired. And the common method of repairing bells back then was to take a hand drill and a file, chisel out the crack so as to separate those two edges so that they don't hit, and you restore the tone. That was the common method of repairing bells back then, and it normally worked, at least in smaller bells. But in this case, after ringing the bell for just a few hours, the tone went bad again. So it was stopped and shut down. We saw this other practice. The key in Philadelphia goes all the way up through the word liberty and to the crown of the bell. So it was really this crack then that was responsible for silencing the bell, and after 93 years of service, it was never to be rung again. So about 6 years later, it was taken down from the tower, brought down to the first floor in the assembly room, put on display. Many of you might have seen it over there before. And then it traveled around the country for different parades and exhibitions, about 11 times in 30 years or so, and it became internationally known. And then in 1976, for our bicentennial, the bell was brought here into the pavilion to allow for more visitors from all over the world to come see it. And once it ceased being a functioning communication device, it took on a different type of meaning, and that of a symbol, where people can come and see the bell and look at it, remember all those liberties that it stood for in the past, religious, political, and civil, as well as any other type of liberty that we might have here in this country bell weighs a little over a ton. It's 2,080 pounds. It's made of copper and tin. It's 230 years old. You are welcome to touch it though, but very gently. Try not to push it or bang or hit it with anything. If you have any other questions, just let us know. Touch it though from the sides and the back. Leave the front open for pictures if you can. Just a couple minutes though. There's a large group behind you. Exits are on both sides. Thank you and enjoy your visit.
Many important decisions were made in the way the United States government would develop. In 1791, the Bill of Rights, the first amendments to the Constitution, were ratified here. And it did two things: put into motion the whole idea behind the Constitution, its ability to change and grow, added to the Constitution. The guarantee of American liberties to the Constitution itself. So they did two very important things. Also in here, it passed legislation to allow the country to grow, adding 3 new states to the Union by the time they left here in 1800. They added Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The country had grown to 16 states by 1800. Population had grown. Representation grew in the House here from 62 members to 106 members. The government was getting bigger. The country was getting bigger. The most important thing that happened here in this room was on March 4th, 1797. John Adams was inaugurated as second president of the United States right here in this room. It's important because it sets a precedent for peaceful transference of power from one president to the next. George Washington stepped down peacefully. John Adams took the oath of office, and we had a new president just like that. The precedent, as I said, was peaceful transference of power. A very important one. Had it not been handled that way, there's no telling exactly how the country would have developed from that point on. So this Congress set so many firsts. A lot of the things that Congress does today, the procedure they follow, the protocol they follow, much of it stems from the 10 years that they were here in Philadelphia. And this is a very important building because of that. You see the building set up as it looked roughly in the late 1790s, just before they left here to go to Washington, D.C. Around 1798 or 1799 is what it looks like. This down here is all reproduction, looking as it did at the time. Upstairs in the Senate, the second floor above you, there is a lot more that is original to the Senate and to that area up there. Here, it's all reproduction, with the exception of the desk right here that is an original desk, and the ballot box on the Speaker of the House's table as well. Now, you're all welcome to go upstairs to the Senate as well if you'd like to. Before you go, do you have any questions about anything down here?
When did they first elect the president?
First, in New York City is where he took the oath of office. Pretty unanimous choice that George Washington was going to be the first president. He took his oath of office in New York City at Federal Hall on Wall Street. That's where the rest of the officials took the oath of office as well. Yeah, spectators gallery. Yeah. They have one in the Senate, or it's the Senate, a little bit smaller as well. Yeah. Who presides over the House of Representatives? Do you know? No? Speaker of the House. Yeah, Speaker of the House. The first one was a man by Justice Newman. You know who the Speaker of the House is today?
Tip O'Neill.
Who presides over the Senate? Legislature of the United States.
Ruby Red-Nose.
Any other questions? No, just this one here.
Why did it not?
Political deal. What happened was that Alexander Hamilton, who was the first Secretary of the Treasury, had come up with an economic proposal for the United States government: federal mint, federal bank, and a national debt. Nobody knows what the national debt is today. You can recall the number. You're lucky. It's astronomical. But the idea was a very good idea initially. But what it was, for the most part, was the United States government would assume the war debts of each of the 13 states. Each of the states would pay a share of that, which sounded really good to the northern states because they had not paid their war debts off. Most of the southern states had, so they obviously didn't want to go along with that proposal for a national debt. But the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, interceded on behalf of the South and said, sure, they'd go along with it for a concession. The concession was that the permanent capital be located in the South. So they decided on a neutral site to be called the District of Columbia or the federal city, to be located on the Potomac River in the South. Today it's called Washington, D.C. That's why it's in the South.
Let's go up to the Senate chamber.
Where our Senate met, they met here for 10 years, from 1790 up until 1800. Actually, some of the events that happened here in the Senate is that George Washington is inaugurated here for his second term as president, and of course it's done in 1793. This is also when we add our first 3 states to the Union. We add Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Of the original artifacts that we have in the room, now today 22 of the senators' chairs are the originals. 10 of them have only been reproduced here. Are there any questions, as you look at the Senate? So all of you do know that the House of Representatives is downstairs, right? Good question. Excellent question. You know why he asked that? Because he doesn't see that in our government anymore. As because initially when we're getting started, we're basically operating our government under the same way or same type of system that England is operating their government. It's the only one that they know, of course, so basically same thing. This more or less represents the upper house in England, the House of Lords. It's red was the sign of royalty in the 18th century, and it's red, more or less. Says that person is pretty special, pretty loyal there. That's why we don't have it, but that's an excellent question. Yes, it is. Another good question. Not always. After 1795, the general public were allowed to sit up on top. You know why this is important here? Because at 1790, our senators were not elected. They were state appointed by the state legislatures. And so, if the people had no say-so or actually had no power among these people, for them to do anything, they weren't allowed to come in. 1795, the people got kind of fed up with that country. And they forced the senators to build this gallery. They would know what was going on in the Senate. The people, the general public, were always allowed to come in the House of Representatives. Why? Because the people elected them. Yes, they did. Today in Washington, I believe to get the Senate, you need special permission from your senator. Are there any other questions about the room? No, none of the senators' desks are original here. They're all reproduced. The desk that the Secretary of the Senate sat at, right up in front of you, that's an 18th century piece. And the Speaker's platform, actually the Vice President's platform, is also 1793. We're talking about the eagle above the Vice President's chair, too. I'd like to draw all of your attention to the eagle that's above the Vice President's chair, and at the same time glancing down the one on the rug. The reason is that you'll notice that they're different, but not altogether. The reason is that because there were a couple of subcommittees formed to come up with what we now call the Great Seal. The one shape of the Vice President's chair probably was the first. Now, we have no actual date as to when that was done or who did the painting. However, when you count the stars above the eagle, there are 15. Now, we have 13 original colonies. We added 3 states to the Union here, which makes it 16. But if there are 15 stars, it tells us basically a time when it was done. We added Vermont and Kentucky to the Union in 1792. Tennessee was added in 1796. So that tells us the painting was done somewhere between 1792 and 1796. No. That's the original. They had at one time uncovered another eagle that was painted on top of that. Okay, the tracings were lost in 1800 when the capital moved to Washington, D.C. I'm sorry?
There's only 12 stars on the sheet.
They're 13, man. It's just,
13 with the one in the middle.
that doesn't really stand for anything different. It's just, it balances it out. Any other questions here? Folks are warming up a little bit.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, well, very quickly, I know you'll be heading on down, but please take a look at our side rooms here. You'll notice the 2 big portraits. The one here on my right-hand side is Queen Marie Antoinette of France. On the other side is her husband, King Louis XVI. Yes? Well, I want you to take a close look at it. This one. I'm sure. Yeah.
All right, these were committee rooms, or the caucus rooms, where they gather to do all the meetings, before they come into the Senate chamber, or all their workings, to paperwork, and so forth. By the way, we have no electricity, actually, so you see no lights in the building. And I was telling a group of kids that, right, okay? When I was telling a group of kids that, I had one little young, so that's before the quartz clocks came in. She came in here, and she said to me, well, how does the clock work if you have no electricity? She never heard of the winding of the clock. Of course, now she'd be really sharp. And they used to store, what was in this room with that one, during the Revolutionary War, they stored the guns here. So whatever kind of ammunition they could have, they would store them up. And either one of these two rooms. The two paintings, I hope you saw those. Those were just
When you like it, you just push the trigger.
Got a chance to see Franklin's house in the courtyard? Upstairs? Okay, only the foundations remain. And so, instead, we keep some portraits of Franklin's family, his portraits, and some of the furnishings and inventions which might have been there to give you a flavor of his 18th century home. The next room is the Hall of Mirrors, which we used to show Franklin's many inventions about years ago. And in the back, we have a number of displays of still in Franklin's life. Some of the hands-on displays of Yes, that's what I said. He was our first ambassador, so he was there at the time of the Treaty of Paris, when we signed the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War, legal, or whatever you call it, the end of it. Franklin had a gout, he couldn't walk, so when they had to carry him, they carried him in a sedan chair. I don't know if it's that one, but one similar, and he used prisoners as something Wall Street to carry him.
Carol.
Okay.
Hey, Carol. Everybody's leaving us.
Franklin's son eventually became the last royal governor of New Jersey. His father, or the illegitimate son, yes. And then, of course, he remained And there are lots of Franklin's wrong, by the way, because his son, sometimes when you read it, I feel like I'm reading the Bible, you know, we begat and begat. He had illegitimate children. In turn had illegitimate children. And they even have Japanese Franklins that turned up. During 76, somebody turned up here and said he was a Franklin when, what's his name, opened up
Began.
Who can prove it today?
some Franklin went over there and had
I can claim I'm Franklin.
these are the telephones. You want to try? Okay.
Will be invited to visit the royal family in their chambers. The queen intends to make Dr. Franklin to stand beside her at the gambling table. Where is his famous staff cap? It has been replaced for the occasion by the white hat he carries under his arm. Look at the spectacles on his nose. The mayor got a learned man.
Of course, they are the bifocals of his own invention.
It is noon, and you are about to be presented to the king.
Firmly assure Congress of my friendship. I hope this will be for the good of both nations.
I thank your majesty in the name of America. Your majesty may count on the gratitude of Congress and its faithful observance of the pledges it now gives. Henceforth, France will back the new nation. Volunteers who have flocked to America under Lafayette will be reinforced by French regulars, arms, and money. The tide of the revolution is beginning to turn. This convention to devise a constitution for the United States. Indeed, if it does not do good, it must do harm, as it will show that we have not wisdom enough among us to govern ourselves. It is the summer of 1787. The Constitutional Convention is meeting in Philadelphia to construct a workable form of government for our newly independent nation. At the age of 81, Benjamin Franklin is the oldest man at the convention, but does not miss a day during the 4 months it is in session. At first, I thought my infirmity might keep me from attending as a delegate from Pennsylvania. But I found the energy because I believed that the arduous and complicated science of government had been too long left in the care of practical politicians. I needed all the strength I could muster.
Sure recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, and the states do have the right.
There never was, nor ever will be, a civilized society without an aristocracy.
Some of the greatest rogues I am acquainted with are the richest rogues.
All states, whether large or small, should have an equal voice in the general government.
Individuals rather than states ought to be represented in the general government. The great advantage shall be given to the larger states. Both the state and the general government were derived from the people, and both meant for the people. It seems we should invoke divine guidance in the heat of such debate, and hereafter begin the daily sessions of the convention with a prayer.
The little people.
The delegates find it difficult to agree on many points. On several occasions, the convention threatens to break up altogether. The weight of Franklin's prestige and the soothing influence of his temperament help to hold it together. George Washington presides over the convention. I speak little, but I hope to the point. Gradually, the issues become resolved.
In the lower house of Congress, each state should be represented in proportion to the population. In the upper house, each should have an equal vote.
It is the last day. It is still not certain whether the Constitution has enough votes to carry it. Franklin cannot stand long, as he is suffering from kidney stones. So he must have his colleague, James Wilson, read for him, as Franklin makes his final plea for the adoption of the Constitution. I speak for Benjamin Franklin of Philadelphia. I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. For having lived long, I've experienced many instances of being obliged by better information or fuller consideration to change opinions. I agree to this Constitution with all its faults, if they are such, because I think a general government necessary for us. I doubt whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better Constitution. For when you assemble a number of men to have the advantage of their joint wisdom, you inevitably assemble with those men all their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views. It therefore astonishes me to find this system approaching so near to perfection as it does. And thus I do consent to this Constitution, because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best. After more heated debate and a last-minute amendment, the Constitution of the United States is approved.
What you're trying to do?
Take a picture of the lobster.
What is the lobster?
Is it one in the back in the center trying to get out?
Oh, yeah.
You want a dead lobster?
No, see, I'm very young, and I slobber a lot, so...
Hey, Jan, we're going to splice this onto their tape with a Chinook, all right? Remember you and your...
Right.
You going to get some more? I can't get it all in the lens. It's too big. I'll have to stand back. Good looking brunette over here.